Hi, everybody. Today's November 13th, 2023, and I'm honored to have with me Professor Dan Klein. Dan, tell us about yourself, your background, and what has been your interest of late.
I'm an economist by degree and by position at the university in the economics department at George Mason University. What I really do more is moral philosophy, moral theory, political theory, stuff like that lately. My remaining kind of foot in econ is editing Econ Journal Watch, which keeps me interactive with submissions and so on at that journal. But I don't even think of myself that much as an economist nowadays, I have to say. I am running a press or an imprint with Erik Matson called CL Press. And I encourage people to check that out. We've been putting out some books, including a lot of stuff that I've kind of developed over the years, but also other stuff. We have a book on China liberalism coming out soon by Evan Osborne, for example. So that's a little bit about me.
So the CL, that doesn't stand for China liberalism. Where did you come up with CL?
CL, as we say on the front of the webpage, can stand for either classical liberalism or conservative liberalism.
Well, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but what is conservative?
Conservative liberalism is, in my view, an apt term for Adam Smith and people who I think were on the same page with him in his time, like David Hume and Edmund Burke. I would say that I'm suggesting that the best classical liberalism was Smithian in that way and can aptly be called conservative liberalism.
So that's not an oxymoron for our contemporary listeners.
That's right. That's right. The term challenges some conventional or common ways of thinking of those two terms. They're both terms, liberal and conservative, are have many meanings, and this is sort of trying to advance a set of meanings and an expression conservative liberal to try to transcend some of the problems and failings of a lot of the accepted meanings.
Right. So my wife's a classics professor, and along the way, I've learned a lot from her and her subjects outside my own ken. And liberalism, my understanding, comes from the concepts of that which the, say, Greek or Roman citizens would have to learn to kind of keep the society free, the liberus, liberty, freedom. And the trivium, whatever the subjects that we would need to know to keep, to be able to manage society in a stable manner. Now, obviously, they had citizens and non-citizens, and they had slaves and whatnot. So it's not quite the situation we have today. But the term liberalism has taken kind of a weird pathway. People say sometimes today they're a Kennedy liberal when they, they're kind of a Democrat mugged by reality into republicanism. And then conservative, means, I guess, trying to pick and choose that which has been successful. So it's a kind of a garnering or harvesting of better, more successful ideas. How do we interpret liberalism and or conservatism today? And in your little adjoining those two terms, what is are you getting a best of both worlds or the best of this world?
I'm trying to get the best of the world. Certainly, you're right. Both terms are really complicated. Liberal has a much older history than conservative. Conservative is relatively new. It didn't, conservatism as a word didn't start until the 1830s. Well, but also the term conservative as a political term didn't start earlier and wasn't a significant moral term, the way liberal, as you point out, has always been a significant term in morals. And those understandings of liberal for centuries, coming, as you say, up through the Latin, I suppose, were about personal virtues, generosity, tolerance, and all of the virtues becoming a free man. This goes to your point about different kinds of citizens, free citizens versus slave citizens, and liberal, like we have liberal arts, liberal sciences are virtues studies, becoming of a free person. Those are non-political meanings. It is only in the 1770s that liberal first takes on a political meaning, and that meaning is the Adam Smith meaning of allowing every person to pursue his own interest his own way upon the liberal plan of equality, liberty, and justice, which he develops. And he and his friends christen their political outlook with the name liberal in that fashion, and that gives rise to liberalism in its classical liberal sense. So liberal, but then of course later the term liberal took on quite contrary meaning. So the word liberal is really complicated, and it has this whole long history of a kind of non-political meanings. I like that Adam Smith notion of liberal. I'm trying to promote that. It's basically individual liberty, small government, anti-governmentalization, understanding of political liberalism. So that's definitely center in my notions, and in conservative liberalism. Let me just point out about the expression conservative liberalism, that the noun is liberalism. Conservative is a modifier. And I could go on about why I think that's a good modification, a good, adjective to put in front of it. But that brings out some of the many understandings and connotations of the word conservative. So I'm kind of taking on board some of the connotations of the word conservative, but not all of the connotations. Some of those connotations even contradict each other, I would say. So that's just a little bit about it.
Okay, so I actually would like to kind of go into your Smithian morals, and I'm interested in what that represented in his time. How did he get to be Adam Smith? And what was his role, and how was he accepted, and what was the aftermath of his concepts? How well did they reverb in the context, and what was he fighting against?
I do think he was fighting against the governmentalization of social affairs as a primary thing. So he was fighting, as it were, for liberty, for the government to back off, kind of keep its hands in its pockets, broadly speaking. He starts as a moralist, and he establishes himself as a moralist. And indeed, he was a leader among his peers in Scotland. And Scotland itself became a very prominent mountaintop, if you like, in the cultural topology of Europe. So Smith achieved a sort of cultural royalty in culture in his time with the theory of moral sentiments. There were people who had some reservations about it quietly, but it was a quite well accepted book. He was very well accepted and prominent and became professor at Glasgow. And it's as a moralist that he then comes forward and advances the system of natural liberty, or the liberal plan in The Wealth of Nations. And it's very significant that he's him who says the things in The Wealth of Nations. He is a moral authority. If it's just some other guy who doesn't have the same moral cred, it doesn't have the same impact and authority. So that's an important thing to understand about why he's so influential.
So how does one become a moralist? I mean, did you apprentice under some other moralist and then, hammer morals into, I'm making like a shoemaker analogy here. And, what is the street cred to become a moralist? Is there a religious aspect to it? I mean, I understand there's, we are a far more religious society.
There's two things here. There's being a moralist, which I suppose is doing moral theory, writing about morals, about ethics. Sort of anyone can do that at any time. That's different from being what I'm calling a moral authority. I mean, a prominent mind, person, personality, figure, an authority in culture. And that's what I'm trying to emphasize here is that, and doing moral theory is partly how he became a moral authority. But a lot of people did moral theory and did not become a moral authority the way Adam Smith did. How do you become a moral authority? I don't, it's just like a sociological thing of him being very, very impressive and outstanding among his peers, his circle of peers respecting him, and that circle of peers being respected by the world, by their society in Scotland or Britain, and then beyond to Europe. So how do you do that? I don't know. How do you be Paul McCartney? I mean, I don't know. That's just difficult.
That's a great example. So I don't want to get too bogged down in terms, but I was looking at your Smithian Morals book, and you bring out the kind of not 3D but 3V, and I'm wondering whether we form societally like a metastable arrangement where I guess in an Aristotelian plane, there's, I get maybe like, better than that, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, a little bit easier. The Goldilocks finds one bed too hard, one bed too soft, and one bed just right. The porridge, cold, hot, just right. And so here we have kind of certain axes of human behavior, and there's excess and deficiency, and then obviously just right. So maybe I'll put up a little picture from you to demonstrate this. But can you talk about a little bit how we as a society manage to classify and qualify these aspects, and how we can kind of stay on the what I call a metastable point of essential virtue?
Sure. If you can get that picture up, I think it'll be super helpful. Those are really great questions. Those are the kind of questions that the theory of moral sentiments is very much about. Adam Smith's first book, that is. In a sense, it's also his last book because he revised the book so significantly, I would say quite significantly. Not that he changed, like reversed anything he had been doing, but he did develop it a lot in the final edition, especially. Yeah, so you mentioned the 3V framing. Now, are the viewers seeing the picture?
No, I'm
You're working
with it. I apologize.
That's
I will
all right.
have it up shortly. There was so much I was reading of yours. I've kind of gotten a little bit waylaid, but carry on as best we can.
Sure. Yes, there's a basic Aristotelian framing that you can do when you're talking about certain types of behavior. Let's say stepping forward when you need to be, when you're facing a challenge and possibly some danger. So this is the example of courage as the virtue. Now it's not specific to courage, this framing. It works for any, in principle, I'd say it works for any kind of virtue you may identify. But there's a sort of stepping forward despite the fear and danger, and there's a sort of, like you say, optimum or sweet spot there. I think we lost it, but and then on either side of that there are vices. There's the vice of deficiency of stepping forward, and we call that cowardice, or excess of stepping forward, facing up, like disregarding fear, presumptuous rashness. These are Smith's terms, by the way. And so this is a old Aristotelian framing. I'm not sure that it was entirely original with Aristotle. But Smith embraces this, and it does suggest that, in terms of certain aspects of behavior, we can organize our, moral understanding of it in this frame of deficiency, virtue, excess, vice, virtue, vice. And this is about an individual. It's about some guy, let's call him Jim. It's about, Jim's conduct. Now, Jim's conduct is, of course, affected and influenced by social influences, by his upbringing, by the people around him, and so on, by reactions to his behavior. So it's all embedded within, a social experience, a social story, a larger story. And that gets to what you were talking about, Randy, about, society maybe falling into vice of one sort or the other. If we're talking about virtue in particular, here are some other virtues. Thanks for pulling this up. So we just talked about courage, with the deficiency being cowardice, excess, presumptuous rashness. We could talk about the virtue of frugality, where the deficiency is profusion, that is, watching your spending. And then the excess is avarice, being kind of penny pinching. Magnanimity, that's big souledness. That's like magna animus, like big soul. And so pusillanimity is being shrinking and small. And arrogance, of, again, overthinking or overestimating your sensibility, your instinct, your vision. So we definitely have issues. Of course, the big question about the course of morals in our society, in any society, is a huge question that I'm sure we're all completely consumed with and are occupied with and critical about the course of things. I think we are in a downturn, a big downturn. When I say a downturn, it's kind of like, what historical scale are we even considering? I like to go long in terms of these historical narratives.
You're the Josh Allen of moral philosophers, then.
All right, I don't know Josh Allen.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's a 6'5" quarterback who can toss the ball 80 yards.
Oh, I see. Anyhow, yes, I am concerned that there's a lot of bad dynamics and perhaps strong reinforcing downward dynamics in play. So I am very, very concerned, apprehensive, troubled. Does that help?
Right, so I'm going to refocus a little bit. This may not help us refocus. This might actually get people into a trance.
Oh, wow. Okay, sure.
This is the spiral of knowledge with 4 phases: fact, information, interpretation, and judgment. And I want to kind of segue into misinformation and disinformation, the topic of one of your recent articles. So perhaps you can wind us in and out of this hypnotic phase.
Okay, sure. Yes. So I oppose flattening knowledge down to information. There's a lot of that going on. That is to say, the flattening of knowledge down to information in economics, academic, professional economics, and in I think in other fields, many other fields as well. You might want to keep that picture up and it's because the richness of knowledge and the facets that are shown there, apart from information, really trouble and challenge the guys who pretend to know and pretend to have good advice and predictions and want to control. So I think there's a kind of hubris and self-flattery in the flattening of knowledge down to information. But before we get into any of those political things and the fascistic ploys that are afoot with respect to so-called mis and disinformation, let me just say a little bit about this spiral and these facets. Let me distinguish, especially first, these three facets: information, interpretation, and judgment. And I'll come back to facts. Information is understanding certain basic, facts through a conventional interpretation. We have a certain very basic conventional interpretation. For example, if you and I are looking up, I'm going to talk about a phone book, although nobody uses phone books anymore. But it's an old example, and I'll use it. You can look it up.
Phone.
Yeah. And we interpret the markings, the ink markings on the page as phone numbers. And that's just so basic, and it's like the working interpretation. And so we call that the information. And, we used to call the service on the phone of calling someone up for someone's phone number, calling information. Then there's the possibility that these markings, or whatever it is we're dealing with, ought to be interpreted differently. Maybe it's a secret code that's in the phone book that spies are using or something. And so you open up here to other interpretations, okay? And those are very open-ended and can always be created anew. That is to say, once we start developing an interpretation of anything we actually care about, I'm not talking about just looking up Jim's phone number, but interpreting events, history, describing a historical event, describing what happened in the news yesterday or what have you. We have many, many possibilities in terms of interpretation. And knowledge involves also a richness of that portfolio of interpretations and an openness about interpretations, about receiving new interpretations. And then judgment is about taking stock in interpretations and acting on it. So judgment is the action facet of knowledge. It's kind of where knowledge interpenetrates virtue, conduct, action. And so this judgment is kind of taking stock in or acting on certain interpretations that are in your portfolio. And all of this is a spiral because our discussion, suppose we're talking about the world, we are going to sense among us in our conversation certain judgments that we all feel quite fine about going forward with. And so we might then take those as facts. Okay, so fact means claims that no one among the conversation cares to dispute. Like facts means not a subject of contention. Now, we might reconsider certain of our facts and open them up to contention. That's fine. We should, that happens all the time. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying that once that happens, it's no longer a fact. So that's how we use the word fact. Like, yes, those are the ink markings on the page. None of us are disputing that. And in the working interpretation, that is a 6 there. We could go back and say, oh, you know what? That's not a 6. That was a smudge on the page and whatever. And then, we might debate, is that a smudge or is that a 6? Or, is that, there's a famous Kierkegaard little parable about a guy puzzling over a vocalization in an edition of a book, and his wife calling him to lunch and him puzzling over this, and says, thank you, my dear, but I cannot come to lunch. I'm puzzled over this vocalization. And he says, I can't come to lunch now. I've got to figure out what's going on here. And so then she breathes, because she understood right away that it wasn't a vocalization. It wasn't a dot. It was a grain of snuff. And so she she blows it away. And then he's overjoyed, partly because his puzzle is solved, and partly because he gets to go to lunch, and partly because his wife is so wise, because she saw a different interpretation, a better interpretation. But so anyway, this is, there's no uppermost or lowermost loop to this kind of thing. All of our facts are theory laden, in the sense that we could dig backwards into them and find the interpretations that they involve, and the judgments that they involve.
We were just doing that with the word liberalism, in a sense.
That's that's true. I mean, that's true. Absolutely. I mean, you could come up with more concrete examples of what you're saying. Yes. Where someone says this and uses the word liberal, and then we could reinterpret it because, well, maybe Adam Smith meant liberal in a way that, Paul Krugman doesn't mean liberal, etc. So anyway, that's a little bit about the richness of knowledge. This take is very open-ended. It's very, you could say, Hume, Smith, Michael Polanyi, Hayek-ish. And it has to do with a kind of a epistemic humility. So it relates, I think, to classical liberalism and opposition to the governmentalization of social affairs. The government is so shabby in its interpretations and judgments, and its interpretations and judgments don't have good correction mechanisms.
Right.
They don't correct. They make bad judgments and they double down. And then when it goes wrong and it goes off the path and it goes terrible, what do? They lie and double down again.
Right.
And that's not the way that, like, voluntary and private.
Right. I want to kind of get to that. There's a math parable to so we can exchange parables here. It's our brain teaser maybe. You land on an island, and there's two types of people, truth tellers and liars. Are you familiar with this one?
Not closely. Maybe I've heard it.
They look alike. You can't tell them apart. You want to go to the main city, but a liar will tell you the wrong direction, and a truth teller will. You can't tell who's telling you the truth. So there's an embedded question you can ask, and I'll give you the answer to the puzzle. Basically, you say, because they know each other. And
so there's just two. There's one of each, and there's two people.
Yeah, there's two types, and but they're all throughout the island. So when you encounter somebody, you don't know if he's a liar or a truth teller.
Okay.
Or depending on your politics, somebody of your party or not of your party. And so the way you do it mathematically is you say, what would somebody? You basically embed the question. You say, what would somebody not of your group answer if I asked if this is the way to capital city? And so the truth teller would tell you the truth that the liar would say it's not. And the liar would lie, because the truth teller would say that it whatever it is. So they both say no. If that's the correct way, they both say no, because they're looking at the way the other one would speak. And so it's the way out of the maze of the lie. I only bring that up as a preface to to what I am making of your work. The next slide. So this is sight unseen. But here we have, in this kind of hall of mirrors, I have two quotes here. It is government, especially, that lies programmatically. The lying can be at the level of information, but it usually makes more sense to say that this lying is at the level of interpretation, which kind of goes back to your other theme here. And on the right, we can carry on this quote, but it lies with confidence. I cut this one out because whatever your politics are, I think we will note that there are some politicians who do this better. Government is the only player in society that initiates coercion in an institutionalized way, and so forth. At any rate, so I'm wondering whether you want to, first of all, whether you think this is an apt slide to put up, and whether it segues into your kind of misinformation, disinformation topics, and what else? I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, absolutely. Bringing the special nature of government, monopolized coercion, doing something which, if anyone else tried, would be considered criminal, and insulating them from accountability, from responsibility, from correction. They can, if they control, if a party of liars, especially, and I do think that the Democratic Party is now like taken over by its vicious tail and is way worse than the Republican Party. Not that there isn't a lot of bad in the Republican Party, but in different, parties around the world, in different countries, and I think the deep state is mainly leaning to the left and voting for the Democrats. But so I do think, you got your Jim Jordans and your Rand Pauls and others who are not fitting this description and are trying to correct things. But let's just focus on the takeover of everything by the left. Yes, so they can just lie and then not be accountable to whatever sanctions would be appropriate to their bad conduct, because they've created kangaroo courts writ large. And one way in the case of the mis and disinformation ploys, they try to, mask it as reasonable by claiming that these matters are matters of mere information. And so, because, we do have this strong feeling that someone going around, not the government, which lies programmatically, but just anybody, just a regular person, an organization, a company that goes around spreading false information, really is a bad thing. And it's something which is very naturally, I think, limited and corrected in normal voluntary society. But so we have a kind of strong feeling that, propagating false information is wrong. They're playing upon that. But what's phony about their mask is that it's not matters of information that they're actually targeting. It's much larger. It's knowledge, it's interpretation, it's judgment. And what they really are doing when these despots say misinformation, they mean miscreancy. They mean wrongthink. Well, they mean stuff that we, the tyrants, the fascists, I like to use the term leftputs, like leftputism instead of despotism, leftputism, that we leftputs don't like. And because they have weaponized the institutions that people were accustomed to respecting and trusting, they can try to put this through with their kangaroo courts and their, writ large. I mean, whether it's the court of some fact checkers, some media, some crappy academic institutions or outfits, and the government itself, so-called, medical societies and so on. And so that's what, so the they're calling issues of knowledge, they are again trying to flatten knowledge down to information and treating it as though, look, obviously wrong, false information is wrong, when it's obviously much larger than just information. It's about interpreting and it's about interpreting matters and then judging interpretations. So it's a big fraud. They're doing this with language on many fronts, including hate and hate crimes, hate groups. They're doing it with the word toxicity. They're using the word toxicity in their own preferred kangaroo court way. Another one, of course, is conspiracy theory. So they do this, it's just like a normal language ploy of the leftputs.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm skipping forward a slide because you mentioned hate. um,
Yeah,
so I don't know if this is going to be too jarring to switch course a little bit, but um,
it's related.
fair enough.
Yeah, you want me to speak to this?
Well, either you or I.
Oh, go
you're,
ahead. Well, I'm
you're,
sorry, I didn't mean to
no,
cut you
no,
off.
I'm teasing you. You're going to be better at it, so I'm going to leave it to you.
Um, yeah, it's just that they're playing again, just like false information is something we naturally think is bad and wrong, like someone going around spreading false information. Like you're saying, you go to the island and someone points you in the wrong direction knowingly. It's like, what an asshole. So, and so likewise, hate is very much a sentiment to be kind of tamped down and controlled. Adam Smith talks about that and why that is. But hate is not actually like an altogether bad thing. Like there is proper hate, there's proper hatred. Edmund Burke, I don't see the quote here. Maybe it's on the next page, but of what you're looking at there. But
Well, I took this. I made this into a slide, so I'm going to have to go reference it later.
that's fine. I think I can quote it. I think the quote is, "They who do not hate what they ought to hate will not love what they ought to love." Mm-hmm. And yeah. I think that's very true.
Yeah.
And in Adam Smith, let me just finish this thought. And in Adam Smith, hate is part of the whole scheme of sentiments, and it's an inverse of love. But so it has to be there, and it's proper. It's necessary to be there. The question about hate is whether the thing hated is actually hate worthy. And also, we do have a different approach to hate than to love. They're very asymmetric, just like resentfulness and gratefulness are very asymmetric. And so these unsocial passions, as Smith calls them, as opposed to the social passions, they have to be much more controlled, tamped down, and watched. And that's what they're playing on here again with this word. But when push comes to shove, they decide what's hate-worthy, really. This little thing from Get Smart kind of captures this.
That's a great quote.
We're a hate group. We hate hate. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. You're going to say, Randy?
Well, I was only going to bring up another word similar, which is discrimination. If somebody has a discriminating palate, that means they are refined and they understand what is good and bad. They abjure bad tasting food. They are discriminating, and you're discriminating in your friends. You pick the right people and so forth. However, discrimination is a bad thing. We can't in some way be discriminating because that implies that we are over stupid in our discrimination, that we are just taking that one bad apple, say, would ruin a whole lot for us. So if we don't like somebody, we won't like the group from which that came. So if I found an apple with a worm in it, I would never want to eat apples again because apples are horrible. So that's over discriminating, say, and that would be discrimination. So we have anti-discrimination laws, when in fact that at its base, say, is a way of discerning and making. We discriminate all the time. We discriminate almost on an animal basis because we have to. We make really quick decisions, not just in the sports field and whatnot, where you have your career depends on it. Is that a right read? Is that the way to travel? Am I going to get hit? So, but as we do, travel, literally navigate through the world, a physical world and our mental world, we always have to be discriminating in what we choose. That's probably redundant there. And then there's other ways in which language gets, interpreted. Kind of. I don't want to go too far afield with this, but affirmative action, say, is a great thing. I mean, who doesn't want affirmative action? I always want to act affirmatively. What else would I be doing? I mean, the mere action is an affirmation of some choice. However, it gets applied to something which you cannot be against. Ditto affordable housing. Who could be against affordable housing? But Thomas Sowell said, when I was, in a PhD student, it's probably 57, 60 years ago. He says, I lived in affordable housing. I lived in that which I could afford. Right now we have subsidized housing, which is not affordable. Anyway, so there are ways in which words kind of get misinterpreted and reapplied in kind of a 1984-ish Orwellian sense. And I think maybe we could speak to the second part of the slide, hate speech and so forth, which, or hate crime, which we always had crime to begin with. Murders are already a bad thing. And so, how do we discern which murders are extra special, super bad?
Yeah, that all makes sense. And you bring up good examples like the word discriminate. You're absolutely right. They've kind of turned the word into a pure pejorative, like discrimination's always wrong and bad. I completely agree with you. Yeah, and they're using hate in this false, irresponsible, incoherent, bullyish, fascistic way. I mean, it's all part of a big ploy, a big operation to crush dissent. I mean, that's what all of this is about. That's what all of these misinformation, hate speech, toxicity stuff, throwing around the conspiracy theory stuff, all this, so much of this word stuff is about crushing dissent. Crushing dissent is sort of the second half or the second shoe in the fascistic pair of propaganda and censorship. They need first on propaganda to do that programmatic lying, to put out their way of thinking about or talking about some issue to sustain their fascistic positions. And then they need to crush criticism and dissent from that. And that's where the censorship comes in. That's where labeling things as mis, dis, hate, and so on comes in. So it's just the normal two sides of fascism, propaganda and censorship, I would say.
So I pulled up another quote from one of your articles. I can read it. The rule of law means first and foremost the government living up to the rules posted on its own website. Governments today don't do that. We can go on. You mentioned kangaroo courts and so forth. The anti-misinformation agenda is misrule.
Yes. Again, they don't. The rule of law to me means first, sort of most literally or primarily, sort of posting the rules on a website, the government's rules, which we'll call then government law, and then equality of subjection to those rules. So some kind of living up to those rules. And that would be the rule of law. Now, I think rule of law is, by the way, another one of these rich expressions with a lot of different connotations, and a lot of connotations relate to what I just said, like liberty and so on, because the further you get away from liberty, the further or harder it's going to be to actually sustain that living up to an equal subjection that I just spoke of. So yeah, they're not doing that. I mean, they're putting out this crap about hate, about misinformation, disinformation, and it's not based on, explained, meaningful, clear rules posted on a website about what is, what isn't, what these words mean, how it's determined, and then not equal application. It's totally weaponization, two-tiered system, going after the non-leftists, whether they be conservatives, classical liberals, Jordan Peterson, whoever the case may be, Donald Trump with, I think that's a total, weaponization for the most part. So yeah, we're increasingly fascistic and not rule of law, unfortunately.
How does this play out? I don't know if this may above your interest, whatever, and predictive, whatever.
Yeah.
The old expression, it's sure it was Mark Twain and I guess others, but it's been around before him, is that lies go around the world before the truth can get its pants on. And I'm thinking of a couple different examples. It's not quite the same thing, but the open border, which is not an open border somehow, will let in, say, 10 million people before others can get, injunctions or impeach Mayorkas or whatever. Similarly, the election can occur before there can be any kind of statutory redress or anomalies and so forth. Things happen, and then you can't unroll them. And then we have, Missouri versus Biden, which is a misinformation case. But the stuff already happened. You can't unroll all the effects of the, we'll say, applying of misinformation, when in fact the government was doing a fair amount of its own misinforming during COVID. My parents went to Las Vegas and all I got was this crappy T-shirt kind of concept. People will do all their stuff, and then you're just going to get the mop-ups.
You're just going to get the.
Well,
I didn't hear the word.
Let's say doctors Bhattacharya and Cariati and the AG of Missouri or whatever win their case. We already had COVID. They went to Las Vegas, and all we got was this crappy T-shirt of reversing something that already occurred. You follow me?
I think so. Yeah. No. I mean, the worst case scenario is that our civilization is coming undone. It's not going to really be correctable. And basically, America is headed towards some kind of combination of China, France, and Brazil. And that's possible. That we're basically that, it's not really going to be correctable. It's not, there's power to truth, there's power to wisdom, there's power to virtue. So it's not a done deal. It's not a lost cause. We'll see if there's enough residual virtue to check this, to turn it around to some extent. So I don't know. It could go very badly. It could go very badly, but I don't know. And I don't have a good, and like everybody else, I have my pessimism and my hopefulness. Right. Hope springs eternal, and it's a virtue to find hope, to find, the ray of hope and the hope to spring eternal, because that is necessary for you to be virtuous. So however bad things are, they could be worse, and you still got to do your part and try to mitigate the evil in the ways that you can. That's just your fate, so I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, well, that makes both of us. I put this one up here because it kind of segues into what you're talking about. Is virtue rewarded? Could Adam Smith have come out? We talk about the Judeo-Christian heritage. I mean, I think in Adam Smith's case, it's more of the Christian heritage. Is there some Islamic world Adam Smith possible? We're having kind of a clash of cultures at the very least, or a clash of demographics. Will the sincere individual percolate upwards? Could Adam Smith have come about in any of the, say, historic Arab civilizations or any of the current Islamic republics?
Well, I don't know a whole lot about that history, but I'll take a kind of stab at that. And first of all, say that while look, believe me, I'm not super knowledgeable about this, but I do know that there have been Islamic thinkers who are actually barking up a kind of Adam Smith tree. I can't give you the names right now. If you gave me some time, I could dig them up. And I've been in touch with people about them. So, and way in the past, and I think more recently, very much more recently as well. And I think some of them are going concerns right now. Again, I don't really have the names at hand. So But the thing is, and this comes full circle back to our beginning, have they achieved cultural royalty? Did they achieve cultural royalty? And sadly, I don't think so. So, I'm just saying, like, in fact, liberalism emerged in Christendom. I mean, that's a historical fact.
I agree. I mean,
so that's not an accident in my view.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the Judeo-Christian trope is a little bit generous to the Jews in a sense, because I mean, they wrote the book, as it were, and Jesus was Jewish and whatnot. But Christianity took its own pathway, for better or worse, and there are a lot of bumps along the road and so forth. And but I think a lot of these concepts, would not necessarily have percolated up in the same way through either Judaic or Islamic alone sensibilities. And
I can believe that.
Yeah, I mean,
but you could also make the case though that Judaism. I think you could. Believe me, this is way beyond my areas at all. But I think one could make the case that Judaism was necessary for Christianity.
Yeah, fair enough.
So in that sense, it's part of the tradition and heritage. And I think also there's just a tremendous amount, not that I really know, but if you look at the 10 Commandments, the last 5 or so are all quite like commutative justice. Don't mess with other people's stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there's a lot there that is, I don't think the expression Judeo-Christian is just tacking Judeo on without cause. That's not my feeling at all.
But I do think kind of the, I mean, one term for Jews is members of the tribe. And I think that Christianity is less, kind of tribal identified in a sense, and less,
That's certainly true.
And I think that is perhaps a necessary prerequisite for, Adam Smithian type virtue, that if you have, if you're living in an Afghani feudal and futile society, it's hard to get this virtuous circle, because you have other circles that are less virtuous, blood threats and vendettas and so forth. So I think it's a getting out of the tribal into the quasi-national. I'm kind of like happy with the national. I don't want to go like uni world.
Yeah,
but I think it might be a sweet spot between vicious tribal and despotic uni world.
Putting the stuff about the religions aside and just picking up in Europe, over the last, let's say 600, 700 years or whatever, because you mentioned feudal, the kind of big irony and really tragedy, sorrow, is that out of a chaotic Europe, we got this kind of jural integration and the nation, as you mentioned. And I do think that's a lot got to do with Christianity, as Larry Siedentop argues. And there was then this era that said, let's go for the nation state. And then you got this arc that said, and make it a liberal nation state. And that had a lot of sway, or at least a certain ascendancy. And we got Adam Smith and a liberal age. And the great tragedy, which Tocqueville very much nailed in Democracy in America, is that this creation of the integrated nation state, this jurally integrated thing, becomes highly centralized and abusive, and then totally anti-liberal. And Tocqueville is unbelievably prophetic about Klaus Schwab. And so I'm serious. I'm totally serious. And just everything related to Klaus Schwab and socialism and fascism. And so there is this kind of, gee, is humankind going to live up to this Tocqueville test? It's almost like God's challenge. Are we going to
have to go back and read that more
yeah,
carefully?
are we like we invented the nation state, we created the nation state, the nation state emerges. There was this remarkable cultural, I would say virtuous, liberal arc to it. And now that Frankenstein monster, his thing is turned into this Frankenstein monster that's now the enemy, very much the enemy of the population.
All right, I'm going to let that stand right there. And
Yeah.
I'm going to segue into this slide I popped up perhaps prematurely, what the sincere human looks like. Would you like to address this? I can.
Well, it's about, it kind of goes back to this whole cultural royalty, sociology of judgment aspect, and what authoritativeness, moral authorities are based on. And there being a whole sociology behind that, a cultural system, and what we want, and what in healthier systems, it's kind of sincere individuals, open, virtuous individuals who get elevated. I think that remarkably happened in Smith, Scotland. And we have to then see our institutions are going so wrong that they are elevating what I call I think I call them unsincere, because they could be insincere, or they could just be like so heteronymous that it's not even clear that the concept of sincerity applies to the person. So unsincere gets elevated a lot, like an Anthony Fauci, say. And so then we have to we can't trust our institutions anymore, and we have to go back to just a human intuition, interpretation of who is actually trustworthy. And so I talk a bit about what a sincere person looks like, and I elaborate that, and I give Peter McCullough as an example. Not that I know Peter McCullough or know so much about him, but I just have that impression that he serves as a useful example for that. And I talk about the virtues of openness, reasonableness, engaging, following up, debating, candor, frankness, and then I talk about the opposites and point out that that's what these left pots look like. They are closed,
right,
bullying, belligerent, lying, untransparent, everything that's the opposite of what the sincere person looks like. So, it's about reading the new field when all of our institutions have, become so depraved.
Right. There was a 2018, I'm going to come back to this slide, but there was a 2018 law in the Donald Trump presidency, the right to try bill. And it was ostensibly, basically, if you remember Latrell, back in the 70s, people wanted to try this stuff, Latrell, for their cancers. They were terminal cancer anyway, and it was not allowed. And people were zipping across the Mexican border, and they still do, actually, for some, kind of hocus pocusy, hopeful, Hail Mary attempts at getting rid of a cancer. They're going to die anyway. So the FDA is a big bureaucracy, and it takes $1 zillion and 10 years to get any pill out. And people are like, well, I'm dying now. Here's some prospective possible treatment. I'm going to die anyway. Give me the right to try. And so this law was granted for the exigencies of the terminally ill. And there you have it. Now fast forward, it wasn't that much you didn't have to go that fast, but very much, in the next year or two, we had COVID-19 happening in 2020, and there was no right to try ivermectin, HCQ. And I don't really have a pony in that race, whether those things actually work, but I did think it was insincere or unsincere, however you want to phrase it, to prohibit people from trying when there was nothing else around. And if people were desperately ill, these were FDA-approved medications. Hydroxychloroquine has been used for kind of malaria type things and inflammation, psoriasis, whatever. And ivermectin, is a kind of a broad spectrum antimicrobial for parasites and whatnot, but it has some other qualities, possibly antibacterial, antiviral, blah, blah. It's anti-lysosomal at the very least. And it's like, why not give people the right to try that? And I thought it was a kind of
it was like retracting the right to use it. They were crushing a freedom people already had in those cases. Yeah. Partly, I think, through law and partly through.
And I think that was that gave the lie to their behavior and interest. If I am the chief officer of public health and Publius, that means the people, and also the same root as politics. If I am interested in the kind of the political and emotional health of my people, I'm not going to strap them down, lock them up, keep them in their homes. And lockdown was a prison term only, exclusively, never really in public health. And so, in a sense, to get an mRNA, vehicle experiment, which had already been kind of on the books, Bill Gates had wanted to do mRNA. He pledged $100 million to Moderna to make a Zika vaccine solely on the mRNA platform. And so there's kind of like, it seems like the cart before the horse. There were a lot of, kind of Schwabian, world visions of what we should do. We need an mRNA modality so we can treat other illnesses, but let's do it on the back of COVID, keep them locked down, don't have them treat. So we'll have a perfect experiment of naive subjects from which to give them a putative vaccine. We've never given vaccines before. We've never given vaccines after an illness. We're going to do it after an illness. We're going to give boosters when it's a strain that's no longer around. We're not going to allow people even to talk about other potential treatments that they might do on their own. There's no way out. Basically, everything is funneled a little bit like the slaughterhouse, the abattoir. The poor cattle. And I'm sure they have enough brains to figure out how to be cattle out in the wild, but they can't really figure out an abattoir. And they're all cycled and spiraled using maybe your vision, fact interpretation. But when one way or another, they all wind up, as steak, and that's no mistake in either sense of that word. Sorry about that. Anyway, so we're kind of rounding out the hour. We've already over-rounded out the hour. I have a slide that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I have a good, some of your conclusions. I don't know if you want to address this or talk extemporaneously.
Well, yeah, that suggests two very broad different paths: freedom, openness, confidence, truth tracking, dignity, despotism, concealment, diffidence, bad science, serfdom, and servility. Yeah, and the Klaus Schwab types, the Anthony Fauci types are totally number two. I don't know. I have to say, I'm quite mystified by how it works. I agree with you that this tremendous number of very baneful things have been done and are being done with respect to like the whole COVID fiasco. Of course, much more generally as well, including a lot of the climate fascism. Yeah, and I really don't understand something I totally don't pretend to have a great read or understanding of is how this monster works, like how Mordor works, and like how even to like conceptualize Mordor, like its elements, its parts, and the interaction between the parts of Mordor. Mordor is the Temple of Doom. Sauron is the evil eye in the Lord of the Rings. So I really don't understand Mordor today. I don't understand it, but it seems it's so clearly baneful and unsincere, wicked, base, that I don't think talking about it in terms of Mordor is inapt. I mean, something is huge is going on, and we're trying to combat it, and to combat it, we're trying to understand it.
Well, that is a lot for people to take in. How can people?
I have a website which I haven't revised in a long time at GMU. You can also, like you've referred to some of my, you can go to CL Press for those books. A couple of my books there are open access. Most of the books there are open access. So the Smithian stuff, there's 2 whole books of my Smithian stuff that are open access there, and they're cheap to order as well. There's my writings at AIER, my writings at Brownstone, my writings at Just Sentiments, which is at Liberty Fund, Adam Smith Works. I'm here, there, wherever.
Do you social mediaize?
No, I don't. I also, again, I run Econ Journal Watch. So if that project, that kind of thing interests you, you might look there.
All right. Well, any final words for our listeners?
Oh no, just thank you very much, Randy, for having you. It's fun. I appreciate this opportunity.
No, you're very interesting, informative, and deep dive. And I'm going to call you the Josh Allen of economic theorists from now on.
Okay, I'm not an economist, so don't call me an economic theorist.
Economic theorist. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know what to call me, but.
All right. Well, I'm going to leave that blank. I'm going to end with a tiny self-promotion here.
Sure.
If you want to help support my podcast, you can buy my book. It's on Amazon. It's called Overturning Zika, the pandemic that never was. It's a fascinating story. I was amazed by it. That's why I wrote it. It's a Sherlock Holmesian story of people who actually wanted a virus to be in Northeast Brazil so they could bring changes to equity. The poor north of Brazil. It's kind of upside down from the U.S., hotter, darker skin, poverty, whatnot. And they wanted a virus to be there to bring attention. And it succeeded way beyond their wildest dreams. They were actually predicting chikungunya. They were hunting for chikungunya virus. And they wound up, I think falsely, mind you, with Zika, which is basically a dengue variant. Same mosquito, indistinguishable. And then they stipulated that it caused microcephaly. And this was done without any real data, no Zika tests, and no background registry of what was and was not microcephaly. They changed the definition along the way. A lot of bad, I would call it bad science, if in fact there was any science at the time. But it's human stuff. Things went on and it cascaded and turned into a pandemic. It's since disappeared. There's been really no Zika. There's been no microcephaly burst anywhere on Earth. They were predicting basically based on their numbers, 1 million excess microcephalic babies yearly throughout the tropics worldwide. And this has not occurred, fortunately, thank God, and whatnot. But nobody's come out and said, oh, all you women out there pregnant, you can stop slathering on insect repellent. This is not a thing. Our bad. We're really looking out for you, and we were doing our best. But we apologize, carry on, forget what we said, and so forth. That hasn't happened, except for my book. And it's coming out in Brazil now, and I'm trying to promote that. Anyway, if you buy the book, you'll put coins in my palm. I can help carry that message forward, because I think it's important when there's going to be a Zika vaccine around the corner, and it's going to be mandated unless we can point out that, in fact, there's not a problem there for which people should take a vaccine, an additional vaccine. I'm not anti-vaccine. I've taken dozens of vaccines. I've given out thousands. I think they're appropriate in the appropriate time, but not in the opposite. Anyway, thank you so much, Professor Klein. And it's been a real pleasure to have you with me, and I've learned so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy.
All right.